I gave it a go, Paul. Now, Hollywood's just had its worst box office weekend in 16 years. The Hitman's Bodyguard is the most popular film, but only sold $10 million worth of tickets. But what was watched was the Mayweather-McGregor fight. And we'll spare you much post-analysis. If you don't like boxing, you won't want any analysis, and if you do like boxing, you'll have done your own. It seems Floyd Mayweather was so confident he had beat Conor McGregor in the 10th round, he wanted to bet $400,000 on it. According to a story in the New York Daily News, he wasn't allowed. But he was allowed to bet on himself.
Really?
You can bet on yourself.
I think the sort of a broad backing of yourself is fine, but in terms of sort of... It opens up match fixing if you can bet on a very specific outcome. I'll go down in the 5th. That would be quite suspicious. And indeed, specifying a round is a bit off.
Predictions were, of course, numerous, and they were nearly all wrong. Manny Pacquiao, for instance, said McGregor has absolutely no chance. There is no way he'll be able to even land a punch on Mayweather. How could he when he has no experience in boxing?
Of course, Manny lost to Mayweather, so he'd be. It's in his interest to talk him up.
But it also makes boxing sound like a Zen-like discipline you have to learn from very early childhood, doesn't it? To say that he won't actually be able to punch him.
Mm. He landed a couple, didn't he, in the beginning?
Oh, yes, he certainly did. Were you interested at all in this fight? No.
Is that rhetorical?
That's the sorry.
I know. I had sort of a passing interest. It was more of a sort of a freak show gimmick than anything else. And it actually was better than I feared or hoped. Actually, I was hoping a bit more comedy. But it sort of turned into a fight in the end.
It did. It did turn into a fight. Before we go, a prominent ecologist, American academic Professor Raj Patel, will be addressing the forthcoming Extinction and Livestock Conference in London. He's issued a warning that we're used to hearing, actually. Industrial agriculture is bringing about the mass extinction of life on Earth. Mass deforestation, dead zones in the sea, pillaging of fishing grounds, etc. This comment from him, reimagining a world with less stuff but more joy, is probably the way forward. Do you think that's right? And do you think we would be able to create that world? Or we will be? Or are we doomed?
I think it's such a beautiful, although incredibly idealistic concept. It would be wonderful if we could create that, but that horse is bolted.
Do you reckon?
Has it not? Well, I'd like to think that weren't the case, but I think it is. And you look at children these days, imagine trying to turn the clock back about how connected they are, for one thing. That idea of a simple life with less stuff, I think, is just beautiful, but not achievable, sadly.
I think it's a mirage, to be honest. A simple life with less connection, I think, would be lonelier and quite depressing. Although, then again, I did admit earlier I wouldn't mind being a hermit. But obviously...
Sitting on a beach.
A hermit with Wi-Fi.
So you don't think it's possible? So do you agree that we are doomed because it's not possible, or are you more optimistic than that?
No, I think there will need to be a shift away from excess consumption. I mean, just look at the number of motor cars in every household. You know, one used to be quite exceptional. Now it's 3, 4 is not quite the norm, but there's a lot. And we need to just make do with less things and find things we enjoy more.
Right, but it'll be forced upon us probably, rather than we'll go there willingly. Yeah? Rhetorical question. I can see you both agree with me. You need a truck at each end, listeners are saying. That solves... They're believers. That solves the problem. Paula Penfold, thank you very much, Paula. Nice to see you. And Matt Nippert, always nice to see you too. Thanks for coming in.
Cheers, Jim.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Winston Peters and the pension overpayments. Checkpoint can confirm he received a single person's pension when he wasn't a single person. What did he get as opposed to what was he entitled to, and how much did he repay, we ask him. Also tonight, new suicide figures, the highest annual figure on record. And to look in depth at what's happening, we examine the pressure on mental health services in Canterbury. Hurricane Harvey, America's 4th largest city, is underwater. A king country farewell for a much-loved son. Gloria Vale, the cost of staying and the cost of leaving. Can a public hospital really be full stop? And what's it like to win a Rugby World Cup? The loudest player on the paddock tells us.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says he received a superannuation overpayment because he was on a single person's rate while he was living with his partner. Mr Peters revealed last night that his fortnightly pension had been overpaid for several years and that he's since paid it back. He's told Checkpoint he doesn't know how he ended up on that rate.
I turned up and made an application with my partner, but a very senior person at MSD, and they gave me advice as to what I'd get. I'm not the absolute expert on these sorts of things, but I thought it was about right because it looked much lower than the standard.
Winston Peters says neither he nor the Ministry of Social Development could figure out which party had made the mistake. The ministry says it's been in touch with Mr Peters and the matter's been resolved to its satisfaction. Labour is proposing a $25 levy on international visitors. The estimated $75 million a year it would raise would go into a new tourism and conservation infrastructure fund to support the tourism industry. The party's tourism spokesperson Chris Farfoy says 3 million tourists visited New Zealand last year, and more infrastructure is needed to serve all those visitors, especially if the country wants to attract more high-spending tourists. He says local councils are facing increasing pressure to support growing numbers of tourists without the funds to do it. The mother of a man who took his own life says the latest suicide statistics show the system is failing. Figures released by the Chief Coroner, Deborah Marshall, show 606 people took their own lives in the year to the end of June. It's the highest annual number of suicide deaths since the statistics were first recorded in 2007, and up 27 on the previous year and 42 on the year before that. Jane Stevens' son Nicky took his own life after being let out on an unsupervised cigarette break from a mental health facility in Waikato in 2015. She says the figures show not enough is being done to prevent suicides.
We're talking about more than double the road toll here, the number of people that we're losing. I mean, how can people just sit back and allow that to happen? It gobsmacks me, and it's got to change, Jane Stevens wants an urgent inquiry into New Zealand's mental health crisis. Sir Colin Meads has been described as a man's man, a legend and a hero. About 2,000 people went to his funeral service at the Les Munro Centre in Te Kuiti, where family members and colleagues shared their memories of the former All Black. His younger brother Stan Meads says Sir Colin was a bloody good guy, but he could never win an argument with him.
To understand Pointer, you've got to know that every fibre in his body was competitive, whether it was when we were kids, whether it was having a game of marbles, we'd be walking across the paddock and somebody would say, we'll race you to that post over there, and it'd be all on, and I didn't win too many, I tell you.
Stan Meads' wake is being held at the Waitete Rugby Club. Authorities in the American city of Houston, Texas are warning the worst is far from over as rain from the remnants of Hurricane Harvey continues to fall. Emergency services have received nearly 6,000 calls for rescue. Many residents have been plucked from the roofs of their homes, and the only way around much of the city now is by boat. The BBC's James Cook reports.
Nearly 3 days after Hurricane Harvey smashed into Texas, Houston is still struggling in its wake. Rescuers in boats, helicopters and lorries have been bringing people to safety. Forecasters say the storm is on track to dump a record 50 inches of rain on the state. Anyone with a boat, large or small, has been pressed into service. The fourth largest city in the United States has now ground to a halt. Motorways are cut off, both the airports are closed, and 3,000 soldiers have been mobilised to help.
James Cook in Houston. The former MP, John Tamihere, has told the court that a secret witness gave compelling but false evidence against his brother at his trial for a double murder. Mr Tamihere is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, where a man known as Witness C is facing a private prosecution accused of perjury and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Mr Tamihere's brother, David Tamihere, was convicted in 1990 of the murders of Swedish tourists Heidi Parkinen and Sven Höglund. He said witness C told the trial that his brother sexually molested both tourists, took a watch from Mr Hogland's body and dumped them at sea. But Mr Tamihere said Mr Hogland's body was found buried more than 70 kilometres from the police crime scene in the Coromandel, and the watch was still with the skeletal remains. It's 5:05. In sport, and New Zealand will stage its first day-night cricket test next March after Auckland City Council approved the use of Eden Park for the match against England. The game, the first of a two-match series, will be played from March the 22nd through to the 26th, with the first test in Christchurch. The Black Ferns halfback Kendra Coxedge says it's hard to remain competitive at the top of world rugby when players aren't being paid. The New Zealand women beat the professional England team to win the World Cup at the weekend. Coxedge says while women's rugby is very strong in New Zealand, payments for players is still something that would boost the game.
We've got a really good culture, and it does help, and we're such a tight-knit group, and I think not having to see each other all the time almost is a good thing. We all train very hard in our own areas, but in the future it's something that probably New Zealand Rugby would look at.
Kendra Coxedge. However, there'll be no professional contracts for New Zealand women's rugby players anytime soon. The Rugby Union Chief Executive Steve Tew says there simply isn't a full-time program to sign the women up to.
It's not isolated to women's rugby. It's a matter for a lot of our sports. A lot of our Olympians go away uncontracted and making big sacrifices. So we're conscious of that debate, and we'll keep having it. And I can assure you, we've got some very strong advocates inside our organisation that raise all those very valid points.
Steve Tew. The world #1 golfer Dustin Johnson has beaten fellow American Jordan Spieth in a playoff to win the latest US PGA tournament in New York. Johnson sank a metre-long birdie putt at the first extra hole to win his first tournament since injuring his back falling downstairs on the eve of the US Masters in April. That's the news.
A $200 million payday.
The dominance of a man who refers to himself as TBE, the best ever.
I want to go out with a bang. I told you guys it'd be blood, sweat and tears.
Paying it back.
To say that I overpaid $18,000 is just demonstrably false. The repayment is nothing like the figure that is being used by a stab in the dark.
No pay for play.
And even if we found the money, frankly, what would our women do all the time, because there is no one to play on a full-time basis.
Always value for money. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Espiner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the latest research on the gender pay gap. And after 10, he led the development of the Google self-driving car. Now, innovator, entrepreneur and computer scientist Sebastian Thrun is democratising education. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki and Taumaranui. Showers, areas of morning drizzle or fog tomorrow, then mainly fine. Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupo. Rain, briefly heavy, easing to isolated showers this afternoon or evening, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington. Fine spells with isolated showers, clearing tomorrow morning. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, occasional rain, clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, and a few showers in Nelson and Marlborough today, becoming cloudy in the east tomorrow evening with drizzle possible. Otago and Southland, patchy rain, clearing inland this evening and elsewhere later tomorrow. However, showers in Otago tomorrow night. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain today, possibly heavy, gradually becoming fine tomorrow, but showers remain in Fiordland. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. It is 8, coming up to 5:09, and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Kia ora, everyone. Coming up on the program tonight, suicide and its dreadful toll climbing to a record high. We look at the annual figure nationwide, and we look at the pressure on services in Canterbury. Colin Meads and a farewell befitting of a man who loved his family, his home and his rugby, and who spent his entire adult life as one of the sport's most famous sons. Also tonight, the Black Ferns, a full public hospital. What do you do? And Hurricane Harvey. But we begin tonight with Winston Peters and his pension. What we know, thanks to work done by our colleagues at Newsroom, is that he was overpaid superannuation. He's repaid the overpayment plus undisclosed costs. Tonight, Checkpoint can confirm that for at least some of the period involved, he was paid a single person's pension that he wasn't entitled to because he was in a de facto relationship. How and why did he get a single person's pension? I asked Mr. Peters exactly that. Why were you receiving the single person's pension?
I don't know. I turned up and made an application with my partner, but a very senior person at MSD, and they gave me advice as to what I'd get. I'm not the absolute expert on these sorts of things, but I thought it was about right because it looked much lower than the standard, and they apparently gave me one rung too high, and as a consequence, it wasn't discovered.
So you were receiving the single person's pension when you weren't in fact a single person?
and hadn't said I was. That's the point. And more importantly, though, there's a slight complication, but there's no use going into it now because back then I was completing annual IRD returns, and so that's a complication, but it's not worth going into because it just makes people go glazed-eyed, frankly.
Give it a go. I promise my eyes won't glaze. Can you explain what happened?
Well, it is possible the rate was different then and it's different the next couple of 2 or 3 years. I don't know. I wasn't interested when I was told that they had paid an overpayment to me. I was so shocked and aghast at the whole thing. I stopped off my life, got on a plane and came to Auckland to see the person who had contacted me as urgently as I could.
Whose fault was it?
Fixed it up.
Whose fault was it that
you were... We couldn't work that out. Now, look, I've given that answer to your countless colleagues. I said we sat down and tried to work out how do we make this mistake. I have to tell you that it's not rare at all, but as a consequence, we decided we couldn't discover where the fault lay. There was an answer which seems to have been ruled out, even though the answer was given. And so the mistake may have been there, but we don't know.
How long did it happen for? How long were you given the single person's pension for when you weren't in fact a single person?
Well, that's the point. We are not too certain about that because you've got, as the accountant just pointed out to me, IRD matters at the time. But then I later returned to Parliament, you recall, and things would have changed.
Wait a sec. What I do know, and this is not in dispute, is that you have refunded some money, right?
They have set the amount that was overpaid and the attendant interest and what have you that go with these sorts of things.
Okay, so if they have set the amount...
They never gave me the figure and I didn't ask for it because I said, I just want to know what is the sum of money that I can redeem this matter and get rid of it.
Okay.
When
they set the amount that you were overpaid, that would have been a very simple calculation. How long you received the single person's benefit for when you weren't eligible for it?
Now, you know, that sounds pretty logical, doesn't it? But
really?
Yeah, it does. But at no point have I been given all the calculations. I didn't ask for it. I said, I want you to make the number one job that you've got here on this case to finalise what you think the total amount is, interest on top of that, and send me the information.
So you are telling me, and therefore our audience, that you repaid a sum of money without asking for a breakdown of what it was made up of?
Precisely.
And is that remotely plausible, with all due respect?
Well, what matters is not whether it's plausible, but whether it's true.
So how much did you repay?
Now, that's between me and MSD. But I'm reading a 3-sentence letter here thanking me for making the payment, writing to confirm that the overpayment has been paid in full, and considering the matter to be closed. That's the final letter I got.
Were there penalty fees?
I assume so, but I don't know.
And if you weren't at fault, why are there penalties?
No, it's not a matter of question whether one's at fault. Penalties apply whether you're at fault or not. What happens is that frequently people pay up and then they contest whether who's at fault.
Are you going to do that?
That's the reality of it all.
Are you going to do that?
Well, look, this only happened a matter of within this month. This letter I've got here is dated early August. Now, as a consequence, I haven't had time to stop off, and also, I might add, you've got 3 months to do that, and I had not even considered it because, frankly, I'm flat out, as you would appreciate.
Absolutely, I do. It's an election campaign. So let's Let's absolutely accept that on the record, and you work incredibly hard. But what you are telling us is you have repaid a sum of money that you are not prepared to disclose, made up of components that you don't know about, without appealing it and without forensically examining what you were paying and why.
The last two statements about not examining it and not appealing it are in the potential future, because one has 3 months in that circumstance. But given this, with what I was doing, I'm around the country on a bus, I'm flat to the boards, and I didn't have time to stop at all but to make sure that the matter was paid under my instruction.
Who do you think's behind this?
Oh, it's political, make no bones about it, but, you know, it's highly likely to rebound. I'll deal with it when I've got time, but at the moment I'm flat to the boards, getting on with the campaign.
So can we review what we've learnt so far? You have repaid the money that MSD required you to pay?
Yes.
You were receiving...
And within 24 hours of them giving me the figure, yes.
You were receiving single person's pension you weren't entitled to?
Well, for part of it, it sounds like it.
You don't know...
For the full part, I didn't bother to make inquiry to that. I said, you will know what the details. You work them out for me, please. Let me know, and I'll be very grateful to you. And
you have repaid the money without knowing what it's made up of?
I know what it's made up of in terms of its componentry. As to the amount of its componentry, I don't know, which is a complication, frankly, that's getting too serious for me, let alone your audience, no doubt.
Winston Peters, we will have more on this from our political editor Jane Patterson later in the program. 16.5 minutes past 5. All Black great Sir Colin Meads was farewell today, surrounded by more than 2,000 people in his beloved hometown of Te Kuiti. Pine Tree, as he was known, died last Sunday at the age of 81. Our reporter Laura Tupou was there.
Sir Colin Meads arrived at the Les Munro Centre in a 1938 Plymouth hearse with the licence plate Pine Tea. Hundreds lined the street in silence as the procession through the Te Kuiti township came to an end. Mourners came from far and wide.
Wongarai.
This morning?
Left at 6 this morning. He used to take us for trainings now and again, yeah. Used to tell us a few stories.
Whaingaroa, Bay of Plenty, and Des came from Pukahina.
So what brought you here today?
A photo on the wall at Des's place, because in the photo is Colin and Des's father, who passed away this year as well, and another friend who passed away a few years ago. And, you know, we always looked at this photo, and when we'd heard he'd passed, Des said, I always wanted to go to his funeral, so because of his father, and so that's why we came.
What school are you from?
We're from Wellesley in Eastbourne, which is back in Wellington.
So why did you make that long journey?
We came here to Sir Colin Meads' funeral and to give our respects to him.
And what do you know about him?
He was great for history of rugby, and he was probably the best rugby player in the world.
Pine Tree was carried in by family and friends with a Māori cloak nicknamed the Traveller draped over the front. His wife Verna looked on. His brother Stan Meads spoke, along with Sir Colin's daughter Shelley Mitchell, and a heartfelt poem by 12 of his 14 grandchildren.
When we were little, kids used to say, "Oh, your granddad, he's a pretty good fella, eh?" And we thought he was, and what kid would not, because he used to give us Nesquik milkshakes a lot. Nah, that's not what I meant, the kids would say. My dad said he was the greatest back in his day.
Down the road at Pine Tree's local Waititi Rugby Club, the mood was sombre. Men in their number ones watched a live stream of the service, and 2 small pine trees stood at the entrance. Tonight, the club will play host to family, friends and fans. Local member George will be serving up cold ones.
It's a time to reflect Colin's life and Waititi as a club. He's done a lot for us, so it's good to give back to Colin and his family, and just to have a beer and tell some stories and celebrate his life, really.
After sharing Sir Colin with the public, the family are having a private burial at Te Kuiti Cemetery. Mō te hotaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou aho.
Large parts of America's fourth largest city are underwater after the worst flooding in more than half a century. The chilling aftermath of Hurricane Harvey has seen overwhelmed lakes, rivers and bays with water so high the only way around much of the city is by boat. Several people have died in catastrophic rainfall across Houston, Texas, with a lot more forecast for the week. Basically, the system is hanging over the area now. Bridget Burke reports.
Emergency crews raced to pull people from cars and homes as the most powerful storm to hit southeastern Texas in more than 50 years brought catastrophic flooding, tidal surges and tornadoes. The storm caused chest-deep flooding on some streets as rivers broke their banks. Emergency services told Houston's 2.3 million residents to climb onto the roofs of houses if necessary to escape the water.
It was pretty terrifying, I must admit, watching that water come in and keep coming up. So the water started coming up the yard. I noticed it about 1 o'clock in the morning, started coming in the various parts at the front of the house, so I started picking things up. From that point, woke up my wife, my son, made sure they were safe, started putting things up high. Around about 3 o'clock, decided to come over to my neighbor's house, their second story, put them up there, and then started grabbing different neighbors, getting them out of their single stories, getting them up into the second story here. So we had about, last count, 11 people, 6 dogs, 2 cats. So it's been kind of a Noah's Ark for the last 7 or 8 hours.
More than 1,000 people around Houston were rescued by boat as Tropical Storm Harvey hit the region. The US Coast Guard warning unprecedented rain is expected to last for days.
This is a very, very dangerous storm with catastrophic consequence, and folks need to not underestimate that. It is going to be a sustained challenge for the coming days. Many times folks wrongly presume the wind event is going to be the most challenging event. I've seen over the course of my career, it was actually the water event, and we are in for a real significant water event in the coming days.
More than 64 centimetres of rain has fallen in some parts of the city, with the storm expected to dump a further 120 centimetres in some coastal areas by the end of the week. This man was at a training centre at Houston's Magnolia Park as the floodwaters rose.
Yeah, it's been a real tragic. A lot of people I seen in the water, and it was having a rough time. I'm just grateful of the HPD officer that came to our rescue, because the wind was blowing us away. Took the bike down the street, had my dog in the air. It had me finna get ready to go with the dog. I had a lock to lock on myself with the on the bench. We was like balloons flying in the air.
Scenes of submerged highways and flooded homes in the nation's fourth largest city recalled the devastation that struck New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina in August 2005.
I mean, it's up to my chest right in here. And the water, we live on the second floor, so everybody's on the second floor right now. And the water's probably like on the 4th step already of the second floor. I mean, the first floor's gone. I mean, we try to get everything, especially the food and the canned goods.
The storm struck at the heart of the country's oil and gas industry, forcing operators to close several refineries and evacuate and close offshore platforms. The Gulf is home to about nearly half of the nation's refining capacity, and the reduced supply could affect gasoline supplies across the US, southeast and other parts of the country. Meanwhile, evacuation centres have been set up across the state of Texas. President Donald Trump is expected to visit and survey the damage from tomorrow. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Coming up on Checkpoint, hospitals under pressure. A nurse put a no vacancy sign up at Middlemore Hospital on Friday night advising patients the hospital's emergency department was full. And Gloria Vale, the cost of staying and the cost of leaving, which is greater? We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Something has got to change. That's the message from one of hundreds of parents who've lost a child to suicide after it was revealed more than 600 New Zealanders took their own lives in the year to June. The figures released by the Chief Coroner, Deborah Marshall, showed the highest annual number of suicide deaths since statistics were first recorded in 2007. Adriana Weber reports.
Matt Neal was a football-loving 22-year-old who flew through high school and had a knack for ripping up the dance floor. His father, Barry, recalls him always having an infectious smile on his face. But beneath the grin, Matt was struggling, and he kept that to himself until he took his own life in October last year.
My boy was at my house 2 nights before he took his life, and I had absolutely no idea whatsoever. We were joking away, we were playing table tennis together, we were talking about sport and all sorts of stuff, and I didn't have a clue. And yet 2 days later he takes his life. So yeah, when your boy takes his life and you didn't actually have any idea of what it was that was eating away at him, and that's a hard one to swallow.
Matt was one of 79 people aged between 20 and 24 who took their lives in the year to June, the age group with the most suicide deaths. The rate among men in that age group was particularly high, with 61 deaths. Mr. Neal says he thinks many young men, like his son, feel they can't reach out for help.
That age group is the age group where they're cool, they're tough. They don't want to sit there and tell other people what their problems are. They prefer to try and nuff it out themselves. But yeah, that sort of culture that's kicking in New Zealand to toughen up is costing a lot of lives, I think.
New Zealand's annual suicide toll now stands at 606, having risen for 3 years in a row. Jane Stevens, whose son Nicky Stevens took his own life after being let out from a mental health facility in 2015, agrees that the suicide toll is devastating. She's part of a campaign run by the group Yes We Care, which is trying to shed light on the issue by taking shoes around the country, each pair representing a life lost to suicide.
All these mothers, fathers, uncles, aunties, sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, cousins, partners, they're all gone. All these empty shoes representing these lives that are ruined, and families whose lives are turned upside down. And I mean, we're one of them, and we don't want to see this happen to anyone else. And it keeps happening, and it keeps getting worse.
Jane Stevens hopes the campaign will prompt an urgent inquiry into New Zealand's mental health crisis and spur some action.
We're talking about more than double the road toll here, the number of people that we're losing. I mean, how can people just sit back and allow that to happen? It gobsmacks me, and it's got to change,
The Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation, Sean Robinson, sees the suicide figures are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to mental health issues.
We need to remember the hidden statistics too, that young women tend to self-harm. Self-harm is all part of this bigger picture. Around about 20,000 people a year on top of the number that take their own life, attempt to take their own life.
Sean Robinson says the increase in suicides shows the lack of a unified suicide prevention strategy. Māori continue to have the highest suicide rate of all ethnic groups, with 130 lives lost. For Checkpoint, Adriana Webber.
And later in the program, we're going to look at the pressure on mental health services in Canterbury. That is a story worth staying with us for. But first, do our DHBs have enough money? It's a question we've been asking a lot on Checkpoint of late, and now again tonight, after a nurse put up a sign at Middlemore Hospital on Friday night advising patients the hospital was full. It said people should consider going to an alternative kind of A&E or face a lengthy wait. It was promptly removed after a photo was posted online by Green MP Julianne Genter. But as Zach Fleming reports, it may be a sign of things to come.
The hospital is full. Expect major delays of up to 8 hours. That's how visitors to Middlemore Hospital's emergency department were greeted on Friday night. Please consider attending an A&E or your family doctor, it continued. The professional-looking sign carried the county's Manukau DHB logo, and locals say it's not a one-off.
So you walk in the doors and it was big, and it was right in front of you.
That's Trina Salmons. She saw a sign about wait hours last month, and Mangere resident Nairi Koti says she regularly waits for between 6 to 8 hours for a doctor to treat her elderly husband, who is terminally ill with cancer. She says she saw a similar sign just last Monday.
I had an 8-hour wait on it, and I said, well, that's normal for Middlemore.
Middlemore Hospital declined to be interviewed today. A spokesperson said the hospital does not want to talk more about the sign. In a statement, Acting Chief Executive Dr. Gloria Johnson said a nurse put the sign up without authorisation, and it was ill-worded and inaccurate. The hospital's spokesperson continued that 97% of patients on Friday night were seen within the government's 6-hour target. Health Minister Jonathan Coleman also declined to be interviewed by Checkpoint today. But here's what he told the AM show this morning.
Hospitals are busy. Everyone knows that. The EDs are busy. And so for minor things which the GP could cope with, it's very important that people don't clog up our ED.
Dr. Coleman spent most of the interview talking about and blaming what medical professionals colloquially label inappropriate attendees. People with minor problems who could visit a GP instead of an emergency department. But are they actually causing long wait times? A 2006 study of more than 4 million emergency department visits in Ontario and Canada found that inappropriate attendees have a negligible impact on wait times. The study concluded that efforts to divert them to GPs were wasted.
In terms of the problems that Middlemore's facing and all of our hospitals are facing, it's not those people who are seen and discharged, it's the ones waiting for a bed in the hospital. And they're waiting in the emergency department in cubicles on trolleys because there is no space in the hospital. The GP type patient who's coming to the ED for whatever reason is a problem, but it's overstated, and it's a bit of a flippant dismissal of the real problem, which is through the whole system.
That's Mike Ardar, Otago University's Professor of Emergency Medicine and the former Clinical Director of Emergency Department Services at the Ministry of Health. So if Dr. Coleman blaming inappropriate attendees is a flippant dismissal of the real problem, what is the real problem? Since the 6-hour target came into effect in 2009, it saved lives and reduced ED crowding. But Dr. Ardar says that's largely down to hospitals becoming more efficient, and there's obviously a limit to efficiency improvements.
The things that I think we're beginning to see now, there's a need for more investment.
More capital expenditure.
More capital expenditure, yep.
Checkpoint's reported extensively this month about DHBs struggling with deficits. I asked Dr. Ardar if ED wait times will start to increase if more investment doesn't come.
Yeah, things will get worse. Though I mentioned that the first 5 years was mostly about efficiency gains, there are things we can still do in that arena, but inevitably we're going to need to build more capacity as well.
Counties Manukau DHB Acting Chief Executive Dr. Gloria Johnson says Middlemore is actively engaged in planning for an expansion of capacity, but would not elaborate. In the meantime, Nairi Korti says Health Minister Jonathan Coleman should volunteer for a shift in an emergency department before he makes any more decisions.
And come to South Auckland, don't just pick anyone. Come to South Auckland, come to Middlemore.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program, mental health services in Canterbury under pressure. A Hamilton shelter manager challenges Bill English's claim on Morning Report this morning that homelessness has all but been eliminated in the city. NBA star Stephen Adams hints playing for the Tall Blacks may happen in the future. The world champion Black Ferns are on the way home. What a game that was. Nona is back this week with business news, but before all of that, with the time at 28 to 6, here's Katrina with the headlines.
Winston Peters says he received a superannuation overpayment because he was on a single person's rate while he was living with his partner. The New Zealand First Leader says neither he nor the Ministry of Social Development could figure out which party had made the mistake. Labour is proposing to raise $75 million a year from international visitors. It says 3 million tourists visited last year and more infrastructure is needed. The mother of a man who took his own life says the latest suicide statistics show the system is failing. Figures released by the chief coroner show 606 people took their own lives in the year to the end of June. The Southern District Health Board and a psychiatrist have been faulted following the death of a depressed woman. The woman was found dead at her home 3 days after a visit by mental health workers. Sir Colin Meads has been described as a man's man, a legend and a hero. About 2,000 people at his funeral service in Te Kuiti today shared their memories of the former All Black. The former MP, John Tamihere, has told the court that a secret witness gave compelling but false evidence at his brother's double murder trial. Mr Tamihere is giving evidence at the private prosecution of a man known as Witness C on charges of perjury and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Authorities in Houston, Texas are warning the worst is far from over as rain from the remnants of Hurricane Harvey continues to fall. Emergency services have received nearly 6,000 calls for rescue. Tonga's caretaker Prime Minister has strongly criticised the King's decision to dissolve Parliament more than a year before elections are due. King Tupou made the decision last week, effectively expressing a lack of confidence in the government of Akalisi Poheva. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now. Wonderful to have you back beside me in the studio. Nona Peltier, the retirement village operator MetLife Care has made a better than expected profit. What's better than expected about profits in retirement? Aren't they going up every year?
They really are. Well, really,
Yeah.
a 10% increase in their net profit.
That's what it is year on year.
Yeah, and it translated to shareholders over the full year a dividend of up 40%.
Wow.
So if you're a shareholder and you're looking for a dividend from MetLife Care, you would have got a pretty good surprise today because it was a pretty good payout.
What was the figure?
They're going to pay. Well, I don't have the final number here, but
their profit figure.
their profit figure. Sorry, 250.3 million, and that was a lot of that was an increase in the value of their portfolio, so up 14%.
What was their property portfolio?
Yeah, so that's worth now about $3 billion. So that's they had big increases in the value of their property. They had big increases in the value of the sales. So they didn't sell as many units as the market was expecting, but they got more for them. In fact, their valuation was up 14%, but the sales value was up 10% on that. So they're making a good margin on sales of both new units and resale of older units. So those are ones that have been vacated by end of life situations or people moving on, I guess.
Yeah. Boy, it's big business now, retirement.
It really is. Yeah. And so growth is expected to continue. This particular company has been developing properties. Now they're looking to buy more. They're going to focus on the Upper North Island. They're not interested in going to Australia, as we've seen other Ryman, for example, going over there. They're not looking at that. Yep. They're thinking that their niche is here in New Zealand. They see lots of potential. And so we'll see what happens.
Just before you move on to the markets, give us those numbers again. So what's their property portfolio worth? $3 billion?
About $3 billion now. And so the value rose, I wrote the number here. $259 million was added to the value of their property.
In a year?
In a year. Yeah, in a year.
Yeah.
And so their share price reflected that increase there, more than 3%. That's 20 cents more onto that share price to $6.07. Overall, the index fell, though, and I think that's partly because Chorus also reported today increase in profit. However, their their customers are falling as wireless broadband starts to take up a lot of that business. So they their share price fell 26 cents, 6%. Almost.
Of course, it's a big fall in a day.
Yeah, it is pretty big. So overall, the index fell 0.4% by 31 points to 7,827. Now, the dollar was fairly steady, though, at 72.3 US cents, 91.2 Australian, and 56.1 pence. And that's partly because the central bankers were meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming over the weekend. And Janet Yellen didn't really say anything about monetary policy. And the Central Bank of Europe, the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, didn't say anything about the high value of the European currency. So the euro went surging ahead, and the New Zealand dollar fell to a 15-month low before rebounding a little bit at 60.64 euro.
Nona Peltier, thank you very much indeed. Let's return to the story that was near the top of the program tonight, and that is the suicide rate in this country, the highest annual figure ever since records began to be kept. Mental health advocates in Christchurch say more distressed and suicidal people are coming to help them because they can't get into specialist hospital services. The Canterbury District Health Board admits it's been struggling to recruit staff and says with growing demand on its acute services, the threshold for who can access them has risen. Katie Gossett reports.
A Christchurch mental health agency says angry, frustrated people at the end of their tether have become a common sight at their facilities. Mental health advocacy and peer support offers community-based care, but its general manager, Sue Ricketts, says staff are seeing more people who feel suicidal or have acute mental health needs.
People are in crisis a lot of the time now, and they don't know where to go, and the pressure builds up within them until they are just at breaking point. And that's often the point at which we see people.
Ms Ricketts says while her service can handle such inquiries and will generally diffuse stressed situations, it has effectively become a provider for those with high needs.
People in the community who are experiencing distress and quite high levels of depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. Often the pressure on clinical services is so great that they are now seen in the community.
But a spokesperson for the Canterbury District Health Board, Tony Gushlag, says pressure on clinical services means its staff can't help everyone.
Unfortunately, there is only so much that we can do, and as the pressure has gone on services, the threshold for being able to access those services has gone up. We're just not able to respond to all of the need that exists, and that's undoubtedly impacting on community providers.
Ms Gushlag says the board has also struggled to recruit staff. It has 25 new nurses starting next month, but there are still 35 vacancies.
It's been very difficult. We've had an extraordinary response from our existing staff who have ensured that services continue to be safe, but it's resulted in a lot of overtime and extra hours worked, and it's not been great on a whole lot of fronts.
The Ministry of Health says in the year ending June 2016, 3.6% of the population, a record figure, accessed specialist mental health and addiction services. This year's budget contained $224 million for mental health services over 4 years. $100 million of that will go on 17 new initiatives, many focused on young people. But Tony Gushlag says the demand for services keeps growing.
We continue to do well with the funding that we've got, but the demand, the population need continues to grow. And I think that's a significant challenge for us as a mental health sector, is how do we manage that in a constrained funding environment?
Another community provider, Emerge Aotearoa, says it and many in the non-government mental health sector are funded by the district health boards, so the board's own funding pressures flow on to them. Its chief executive, Barbara Disley, says the industry is also dealing with the impact of the recent pay equity settlement, which increased wages for aged and residential care workers, but not for those in mental health support.
So we're finding increasing pressure, both recruiting staff and retaining staff, and this is starting to really bite into, the ability of the mental health system to cope.
Sue Ricketts from Mental Health Advocacy and Peer Support says her organisation will seek government funding for a crisis centre, which would assess people early on and then refer them either to acute clinical services or to community services. If successful, she believes the scheme could be extended around the country. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Katie Gossett.
The National Party leader Bill English's bold claim on Morning Report today that homelessness has been all but eliminated in Hamilton is being challenged by groups that help people struggling to find a home in Hamilton. A shelter manager says he knows of a couple sleeping in tents by the river, others are on the street, and he's so full he has to turn people away. Others say families are living in crowded houses because of rising rents in the city. Joe O'Brien filed this report.
Here's a fact. In Hamilton, homelessness has almost been eliminated by dealing with the people on the street one by one and the complexity of their problem.
That's National's Bill English using Hamilton as an example to defend his government's record on homelessness. But that's disputed by the manager of the Hamilton Christian Night Shelter, Peter Humphreys.
I'm really not sure where he gets his numbers from. I know the numbers for us is really high. It's the highest it's been since I've been there since 2008, so I'm not sure what his definition of homelessness is.
Peter Humphreys says he's just had the busiest 3 months, with the 25-bed men's shelter at capacity and the 9-bed women's shelter 60% full. The people he helps include former prisoners, addicts and some with mental health problems, as well as working people who can't find accommodation. Mr Humphreys says they've had to turn away about half a dozen people in the past month, and he knows of about 8 regular rough sleepers in the city.
Like there's a couple in tents down by the river, there's a couple on the streets, main street, and others sort of just those where they can really, they move around.
Last year, the People's Project, a collaboration between agencies in Hamilton, said it had housed all but 2 of the city's rough sleepers and found homes for more than 800 people in the last 2 years. But Peter Humphreys says he's seen little evidence of an improvement.
There's only a limited amount of housing that will take people from night shelters or people from institutions. Some people will get into those, fast track into those, but in reality, they're still only the same spaces.
The Salvation Army's Alan Johnson also challenges claims Hamilton has solved the homelessness problem. He says the Ministry of Social Development's figures show 500 people in the city are on a priority list for housing, double last year's number.
The waiting list belies that. It's a great shame that people delivering housing services have spun that as an idea. It's not true. The waiting list is growing.
And he says they're not all rough sleepers, but some may be a step away from that.
These are people who really need housing in almost the immediate future. Some of them will be living in desperate circumstances in emergency housing, for example, or alternatively in overcrowded garages.
Alan Johnson says population growth has left Hamilton short of about 1,300 houses. Road Street School Principal Shane Ngātai says about 20 of his families live in overcrowded conditions due to rising rents.
A lot of investors have come to Hamilton and bought a lot of the properties, and they've just upped the rents to get their returns. And it's also supply and demand. We don't have a lot of rental accommodation under the $400 a week mark now, which is prohibitive for a lot of our families on low incomes.
But Hamilton's Mayor Andrew King says Bill English is right to say the city has almost eliminated homelessness. He says while there is still a handful of rough sleepers, the People's Project has successfully housed 975 people in the last 3 years.
The concept is that once you've got them in a house, then you can provide the wraparound services, get them functioning fully, get them where they've got an address, get them where they can get a job, and try and make them as productive as we can.
People's Project head Julie Nelson agrees they have made a significant impact on housing people in the city, and they're surprised by the criticism from the Hamilton Night Shelter. For Checkpoint, I Kirikiriroa, ko Joe O'Brien tēnei.
Just gone 5:45. A court has been told that a prison snitch lied when he gave evidence at one of the country's most high-profile murder trials. The informant, who has name suppression, told the trial of David Tamahiri that Tamahiri made admissions about how he killed Swedish tourists Heidi Parkinen and Sven Höglund. But 5 years later, he signed an affidavit recanting his evidence. Witness C is now on trial himself. Career criminal Arthur Taylor brought a private prosecution against him, charging him with 8 counts of perjury and 1 of attempting to pervert the course of justice. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
The Crown's case against David Tamahiri in 1990 was circumstantial. At the time, the police had no bodies, but one of the witnesses they did have was Witness C, a prison inmate. Veteran lawyer Murray Gibson is prosecuting the case on behalf of Taylor and said Witness C's evidence was persuasive and powerful.
He gave evidence as a prison inmate who said he was told by David Tamahiri of his involvement in the crime.
The prosecution's case is that Witness C said David Tamahiri told him he had met the tourists at a camping area before sexually assaulting both of them, killing them and dumping their bodies at sea. But Mr Gibson said it was all a lie.
And he said that he did so for personal reward and for other advantages that the police were offering to him, such as assisting him in his upcoming parole hearing.
Tamahiri was convicted. Mr Gibson said a year after the trial, Mr Höglund's body was found buried outside the Coromandel town of Whangamata, which shows the evidence of dumping a body at sea was false. But in 1995, Witness C swore an affidavit confirming he had lied. Years later, he wrote a letter to Tamahiri saying he would make a statement to exonerate him. Mr Gibson said the prosecution case will call evidence from David Tamahiri, brother and former MP John Tamahiri, and the jurors will also hear evidence from a pathologist. Witness C's lawyer Adam Simpringham said there was no perjury because his client was only repeating false information that Tamahiri had told him.
You'll need to look at whether Mr Tamahiri might have deliberately planted misinformation with a view, for example, to putting the police off their scent, putting them off a land-based search by saying that he'd disposed of the bodies at sea.
Mr Simpringham said his client accepts that he later recanted his evidence, but told the jurors to keep in mind the issue of retribution.
Was his intention to avoid violence at the hands of other inmates who wished to occasion retribution upon him, who wished to be violent upon him by virtue of the fact that he had previously given evidence for the Crown? And to use prison terms, he was a narc.
Tamahiri has always maintained his innocence and was released on parole in 2010. The trial before Justice Fata and a jury is set down for 2 weeks. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay ahau.
The world champion Black Ferns are on their way home tonight. Having won the Rugby World Cup yesterday morning, they're returning to the country and to the occupations that many of them have as amateur players, police officers, teachers, students, you name it. The things you do when you're not beating England to be the best women's rugby team in the world. This morning I called their excellent media person Meredith Keys to talk to someone in the team, and they were just boarding their flight out of Ireland. So Meredith passed her phone to the person in any rugby team most likely to have something to say, the halfback, in this case, Kendra Coxedge.
I'm sitting in a seat on a plane on the tarmac in Dublin.
And so you were heading home. You're about to take off and head home.
Yes, and we can't wait. We're super excited to arrive back in Auckland.
And where is your Rugby World Cup winners' medal as we speak?
It's folded. It has been around my neck the whole time. Just as I've sat down, I have folded it nicely and put it in the seat in front of me. Just for the 8 hours, and then I'll be putting it back on again. It gets a bit heavy around the neck.
What's it feel like when you wear it?
Oh, it feels absolutely fantastic. Nothing's better than having a gold medal around your neck.
No, I've got no experience of it, but I can imagine it must be the most amazing thing.
Oh, it definitely is.
Can we talk about the game? Because I was sitting at home on the couch, and after that first yellow card, England gained not only a kind of momentum in the game, but I thought a psychological ascendancy. And you guys looked a bit like, holy moly, this isn't going according to plan. Now, everyone talked about how you rebuilt after half-time, but I thought the crucial period was just before the end of the first half, where you just seemed to take stock and start getting it right yourself. Do you remember how tough those minutes were after the yellow card?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough when you go down to 14 players, but we've trained for it the whole time. So, and actually throughout the tournament, when we had a yellow card, we've actually scored tries. So for us, it was a little bit the opposite way. But the girls stayed really composed, and they play their heart out. And England did get a bit of a roll on there, but yeah, it was very crucial just before half time that we got that try, and we started to get up and get a little bit of composure and get our structure back.
Yeah, you did. And the structure was very much around making the tight work, which of course brings you as halfback into the game in an extraordinary fashion. Have you any idea how many times you handled the ball in that game?
Actually, I don't actually have those stats, but I've definitely lost my voice, and that's not because of last night. That's from the game.
Yeah, you were yapping, and you were just driving, and your arms were going like windmills. And the Fords, yeah. I mean, the Fords played an extraordinary game, didn't they?
Oh, they played outstanding. Like the whole tournament, our backs have been good as well, and for the forwards to be able to, dominate in that game, England weren't ready for that. They thought we were going to get it out wide to our speedsters, like Portia. But the fact that we beat them up front, I don't think they liked that much. But no, the girls did really well.
No, they didn't like it, and their forward pack is formidable, so beating them up front really says something. You know what's really exciting being back in New Zealand is that everyone is talking about it. And all of a sudden, women's rugby, which we've actually been very good at for a long time, and as you know, world beaters, more often than not, is suddenly really on the map. And that's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. We've had the support we've been getting from home the last month has been absolutely fantastic, and we've got it's just really, really cool to be all over the news, and the girls really appreciate the support that we've been getting from home in the last month. What do you do when you're not playing rugby, Kendra? I'm a women's rugby development coordinator for the New Zealand Rugby Union. So my job is to grow the game for girls by creating pathways and being role models for these young girls and try and get them into playing the game. So it kind of suits me quite well.
Isn't it exciting?
I look after the whole Crusader region, so from Tasman all the way down to Timaru and over to the west coast.
And the fastest growth in rugby in New Zealand is female players, right? Overwhelmingly.
Yes, it is. And winning a World Cup like this is only going to help it. And for these young girls coming through, being able to see it on TV and get some role models, it's absolutely fantastic.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Who was your role model when you were little?
Well, for me it was mostly just around the All Black stuff. Andy Ellis was a big role model of mine growing up. I looked up to him a lot. He plays quite a similar game to how I play, and so he was my idol when I was growing up.
and he was a fantastic Canterbury and All Black halfback, but also, and this is so blindingly obvious, I'm embarrassed to say it, he's a bloke. And now, like every Saturday morning, my next door neighbour, who I think is 8, she goes off and plays for the Ponsonby Ponies, right? And now her role models can be women like you.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool, is that that's exactly what we want to do, is inspire these young ones, and for them to be able to see, these games being played live and winning a World Cup, is going to get more girls into the game.
Kendra Coxedge, World Cup winner. A gang member who tried to hide a bag of methamphetamine on the roof of Dunedin Airport has told a court he was in a drug-fueled state that made him feel invincible. Our Otago Southern reporter Ian Telfer was at the Dunedin District Court today.
Few people were in court to hear William Wickie's unexpected mea culpa.
To Your Honour, my name is William Wickie and I'm standing here before you on a charge of possession of methamphetamine.
Wickie said he'd been addicted to meth, also known as P, and he couldn't see what he was doing.
While I was using the substance, it gave me the impression that I was invisible and nothing else mattered, that I was very invincible. But now that I'm clean, I can truly see the damages I have done to my own family, my whānau, my friends and my support network that I have around me.
Wickie didn't explain in detail why he'd flown from Tauranga to Dunedin a year ago with 2 bags, one of which had 5 grams of meth and a glass smoking pipe, and the other with 99 grams, ready to be broken up and sold. Wickie didn't know the police had been tracking his movements and text messages and were ready to pounce when he landed. He fled on foot, dropped the first bag and threw the second one onto the airport roof, vainly hoping police wouldn't see it. Since then, Wickie spent time in Invercargill prison and there did short drug rehabilitation and parenting courses. The father of 5 wants to change, so said he was throwing himself on the mercy of the courts.
This may sound strange, Your Honour, but I am kind of grateful that I have had this time in prison to get clean, become insightful towards the damage I was doing, and to be still alive and young enough to make another path in my life.
Judge Kevin Phillips told Wickie he wrote and read his letter well, but that didn't change a previous indication of 6 years in prison. He told Wickie he now had to walk his talk, and that wouldn't be easy.
You not only have to get this drug thing under control and your addictions and issues under control, but you're going to have to cut the ties with your gang whakapapa, your gang whānau, because if you don't, you're going to be back in there.
Wickie's co-accused, a man from Tauranga, is still to stand trial. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, ko Ian Telfer tēnei.
NBA star Steven Adams, New Zealand's highest paid sportsman, is in the country for his annual visit home, running a series of coaching clinics with children around the country. The 24-year-old centre was the centre of attention at today's clinic in Auckland, and as Matt Chatterton reports, he hinted for the first time that playing for the Tall Blacks, our national side, could happen in the future.
In 4 short years, Steven Adams has gone from a New Zealand star to an NBA icon. Despite signing his mega $140 million deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder for the next 4 years, Adams keeps his feet firmly on the ground. His Steven Adams camps are not only hugely popular, but it helps bring the sport he loves back to the New Zealand community. Today's media session was Adams' first and only while he's in the country, so naturally the topic everyone wanted to talk about was when he'll finally play for the Tall Blacks. Adams has never played for New Zealand, blaming the NBA's conflicting schedule with the international basketball window. Today, however, he revealed there's more to it. Adams says he wants to play for the Tall Blacks, but believes player development needs to be better from Basketball New Zealand.
Can't be solely relied on just like one player. Like, our system has got to be good. Otherwise, like, say if I didn't exist, it's like there's still a problem. Like, we still need to produce these players, you know? So that's what we're talking about, and, like, you know, that's what we're working on.
The person Adams is referring to is Tall Blacks coach Paul Henare. He says the pair have a great relationship and has nothing but respect for him.
He's an amazing coach, man, just a good fella. That's all that really matters. We're really lucky to actually have him as a head coach for the national team, yeah.
So does that mean he's any closer to finally playing for New Zealand?
When the time's right, I'll throw it on, but there's obviously a lot of spring cleaning that needs to be done, and he's doing like an amazing job at it, you know what I mean? He has a vision of how he sees the Tall Blacks and how they want to play. He wants them to play, and he's fighting for that, and you can only follow dudes who are that passionate, yeah.
Adams is in the country for another week, headlining his own charity golf tournament in Auckland. After that, he'll head back to America for the new NBA season. Meanwhile, New Zealand will have to wait a little longer before we see Steven Adams in black. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
About a minute and a half before 6, Katrina is standing by with the news. Lots of feedback tonight. Thank you. For God's sake, John. There are bigger issues this election than the dots and crosses of Winston Peters: climate change, housing, education, medical, idiot trade packs, incompetent bureaucrats, corrupt and incompetent cops, dumb teachers, hopeless mental health system and more. This is Stuart. We've covered many of those things, Stuart. It's not worth going into. Would Winston ever say that about any other politician? He can't sidestep this one. Really polarised feedback on Winston Peters tonight. The bigger question re Winston Peters is, how would your average retiree ever hope to pay back years of overpayments? He was fortunate that he was able to. This was precisely Materia 2 days point. Hi, John. I've been a pension beneficiary for 6 years. Every year I'm circularised by the ministry to check my particulars. I hope that's not painful. Has my situation changed? I believe that all beneficiaries are thus questioned. Maybe MPs are not. And lots of people saying they're required to fill out forms. But also lots of people are saying, believe me, WINS can get pensioner payments wrong sometimes and can be quite threatening about it as well. Thank you for your feedback. We really appreciate hearing from you. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters says he received a superannuation overpayment because he was on a single person's rate while living with his partner. But he says neither he nor the Ministry of Social Development can figure out which party made the mistake. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
Mr Peters has since paid back the money he owed, but he says he did not request a breakdown of the overpayment, just the total amount required to clear the debt. Mr Peters says that could have included interest and or penalty payments. The ministry says it holds a great deal of very personal information that it's not in a position to share. It says it's been in touch with Mr Peters and the matter's been resolved to its satisfaction. The leaders of both National and Labour say any remaining questions are for Mr Peters to answer. This is Jane Patterson.
Tourism Aotearoa disagrees with Labour's new $25 levy on international visitors. The estimated $75 million a year the tax would raise would go into a new tourism and conservation infrastructure fund. Chris Roberts, the Chief Executive of Tourism Aotearoa, says international tourists already pay $1.2 billion in GST as well as the existing border tax.
There's plenty of revenue coming in from our overseas visitors. They are more than paying their way in this country already.
Chris Roberts says Labour's plan just replaces existing sources of funding for infrastructure, dock and training with a complicated new border tax. A mental health advocacy group in Christchurch says it will seek government funding for a crisis centre which would refer people who are distressed and suicidal to the right services. Mental health advocacy and peer support offers care in the community, but says it's now seeing many people with acute needs because the pressure on specialist hospital services is too great. Its General Manager Sue Ricketts says many people are at the end of their tether and don't know where else to go.
We are at the moment scoping a crisis centre for people to be able to come and self-refer to the crisis centre, and at that point we can then either refer them on to the acute clinical services or we can refer them within community services for resolution of their problem.
Sue Ricketts says the centre could serve as a pilot scheme and then be extended around the country. An urgent appeal has gone out to boat owners in the flood-stricken American city of Houston, Texas, to help rescue people caught in rising floodwaters. Officials say unprecedented rain from Hurricane Harvey is resulting in catastrophic flooding. The ABC's Philip Williams reports.
Despite the rescue of thousands of residents already, many more need help. The emergency phone number 911 was called more than 50,000 times during the day, and many more people complained they simply couldn't get through. Authorities warn conditions will worsen and more heavy rain is predicted over the next 3 days in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. An aged care facility was evacuated after a photo was posted on social media showing residents sitting chest deep in water.
Philip Williams reporting. Hundreds of people have gathered at Sir Colin Meade's old rugby club after more than 2,000 attended his funeral today. The All Black great died last Sunday and was farewelled in his hometown of Te Kuiti today. Our reporter Laura Tupou was there.
A hearse with the licence plate Pine Tea rolled up to the town's Les Munro Centre as hundreds looked on in silence. Sir Colin's daughter Shelley Mitchell spoke of his competitive nature, as did his brother Stan Meads. 12 of Sir Colin's 14 grandchildren shared a poem they had written about how Sir Colin gave them milkshakes, and although he was a star to the country, he was always their granddad. The family has held a private burial at Te Kuiti Cemetery, and hundreds are gathered at the Waititi Rugby Club now to continue sharing their memories. In Te Kuiti, ko Laura Tupou aho.
Waikato University is planning to take up a government proposal to fund a new medical school for rural doctors, saying the communities have suffered decades of neglect. The university pitched the idea to the government last year, prompting stiff opposition from the existing medical schools in Otago and in Auckland, which put in a counterbid. They've proposed altering their existing programs with a focus on encouraging more graduates to practice in rural areas. But Waikato University's Vice-Chancellor Neil Quigley says that approach won't make a big difference.
The evidence from overseas says you can't easily just take an existing program, tweak it a little bit and expect to get significantly different health workforce outcomes.
Neil Quigley from Waikato University. Otago University has welcomed Waikato's contestable fund bid. It's 6:05. Sport and NBA star Steven Adams says New Zealand's basketball's priority needs to be on better player development rather than focusing on when he'll play for the Tall Blacks. Adams, New Zealand's premier basketballer, has never played for the Tall Blacks because of his NBA commitments with the Oklahoma City Thunder. The 24-year-old centre, who's currently running coaching clinics in New Zealand, says he wants to play for the Tall Blacks but believes there are bigger issues within New Zealand basketball at the moment.
Can't be solely relied on just like one player. Like, our system has got to be good. Otherwise, like, say if I didn't exist, it's like there's still a problem. Like, we still need to produce these players, you know. So that's what we're talking about, and like, you know, that's what we're working on.
Steven Adams. Let's hope the first day-night cricket test in New Zealand next March will help open the sport to more people. Auckland City Council has approved the use of Eden Park for the match against England. The game is the first of a two-match series. The US Open's doubles draw has been confirmed, with New Zealand's Michael Venus and American Ryan Harrison seeded 8th. The French Open champs and Wimbledon quarter-finalists played the French duo of Jeremy Chardy and Fabrice Martin in the first round. Kevin Proctor could have his leadership credentials reinstated for the Gold Coast Titans' final game of the season this weekend, following the NRL club's run of injuries to senior players. The New Zealand Rugby League representative was stripped of the co-captaincy in May when caught in a cocaine bust along with Kiwis teammate Jesse Bromwich following a test against Australia. That's the news.
This week on Nights, a couple of viola players named Roger are in the studio ahead of the World Viola Congress, where at last they won't have to play second fiddle. Graham Tuckett looks back on a year spent in some of the rougher parts of New York, and then there's the Meet the Candidates gathering at the Arrow Valley Community Hall, chaired by yours truly. Think of it as backbenchers on mescaline. That's Nights this week with me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki and Taumaranui. Showers, areas of morning drizzle or fog tomorrow, then mainly fine. Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupo. Rain briefly heavy, easing to isolated showers this afternoon or evening, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington. Fine spells with isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Occasional rain clearing tonight, fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine. A few showers in Nelson and Marlborough today, becoming cloudy in the east tomorrow evening with drizzle possible. Otago and Southland, patchy rain clearing inland this evening and elsewhere later tomorrow. However, showers in Otago tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain today, possibly heavy, gradually becoming fine tomorrow, but showers remain in Fiordland. The Chatham Islands, occasional drizzle, turning to rain tomorrow afternoon. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. Winston Peters has long fought for the rights of superannuitants, but now he has his own pension battle on his hands after revealing he's been overpaid for several years because he was receiving the single person's rate when he had a de facto partner. He's not quite sure how it happened or whose fault it was, he told us. The New Zealand First Leader found out last month and gave the money back within 24 hours, but he's refusing to give a privacy waiver, enabling the ministry to discuss any details of the overpayment, a situation that one of his political opponents, and that is salient, described as a debacle. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Winston Peters told Checkpoint he did not request a breakdown of the overpayment, just the total amount required to clear the debt. He says that could have included interest and or penalty payments. But Mr Peters says neither he nor the Ministry of Social Development could figure out which party had made the mistake and how he ended up on the single person's pension.
I turned up and made an application with my partner, but a very senior person at MSD, and they gave me advice as to what I'd get. I'm not the absolute expert on these sorts of things, but I thought it was about right because it looked much lower than the standard.
The National Party leader, Bill English, says any questions about the detail of what happened are up to Mr Peters to answer.
Because this is about his personal finances and his personal circumstances. Clearly there's questions there. And I think there's a lot of people going to be asking him, but it's up to him to deal with that.
Bill English wouldn't make any judgments about working with Mr Peters after the election.
You have to see what the facts of the matter are. Mr Peters believes it's a matter that's settled, that MSD think it's a matter that's settled. So if there's more questions to be answered, they'll get answered, and we just have to see how the facts unfold.
The Labour leader Jacinda Ardern is taking a similar approach.
Look, I think it would be helpful if we had more information, but still ultimately this is an issue for Mr Peters to be answering questions on, not the Labour Party.
But the ACT leader David Seymour says Winston Peters has found himself in a messy situation.
Look, it's a debacle and there's a lot more to come because with Winston Peters there's always more and it's always worse than he initially makes out. I would just wish that he'd put the papers out and prove that it really is a simple administrative error.
The leader of the Opportunities Party, Gareth Morgan, says Mr Peters' situation just highlights bigger problems with the system.
Full credit to Winston Peters for paying back the extra money he received from the taxpayer. But doesn't the fact that he didn't even notice he was getting, paid, just tell us how broken our benefit system is? You've got benefits here going to people who don't need them.
The Ministry of Social Development says it holds a great deal of very personal information it's not in a position to share. It says it's been in touch with Mr Peters and the matter's been resolved to its satisfaction. For Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
A young woman who fled Gloriavale after years of believing that to do so would mean she would go to hell says its residents work for free whilst leaders of the West Coast community claim family tax credits as a charity. Lilia Tarawa left Gloriavale with her 7 siblings and parents 8 years ago. Now, aged 26, she says the family left with nothing but $2,000 her mother, Miracle, was able to claim as the community's house mother. Lilia has written a pretty striking book about her fears for the family members she left inside, her life there, the way people are treated, controlled, intimidated, humiliated, and how the argument that people are there as a result of their own free will is naive. In the context of Gloriavale, it's not an easy place to stand up for yourself, and independence is not encouraged.
You are ostracised from the people that you love, from your church, from your society, from everything that's familiar to you from your home if you don't submit and obey and behave the way that Gloriavale expects you to. And there was some really terrible shamings. The children getting walked up on stage with no food if they've been disobedient. The boy, which I've described in the book, that was beaten by his father in front of all of us with a leather strap Like, is that okay? I don't think so. Yeah.
The description of Nathaniel beating and kicking Jubilant over and over again, and you were watching it and you were 11 years old. How powerful is that to you as an 11-year-old, as a message of submission, doing what you are told?
It's pretty strong. My parents would have not let that happen to me, which I'm really lucky they were in a position of authority. But some of the other families in Gloriavale aren't so much, and so they're not treated so well. Yeah, and I just knew in my heart it was wrong. I was just looking at this image, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was a sunny day, and he was being kicked and beaten, and then I thought, okay, surely they'll have this teacher step down because it's the wrong way to treat a child. And they didn't. He continued teaching us, like, that's so not okay. How are there no consequences?
You're allowed to rein me in, right, if I'm getting a bit carried away here.
Okay.
Because there are times when you describe being amongst your cousins and your siblings, particularly when you were little, and there is a feeling of it being rather wonderful.
Yeah.
And you do talk about that stuff, don't you? And there were times when you were very, very happy to be there, but it was when you were younger rather than as you grew older, right?
I think as I started to find my own mind and ask questions, that was when I started to become dissatisfied with some of the rules, and I'd started to question the leaders' decisions. But I totally loved my cousins. We were like siblings. And so to make a decision to leave meant that I had to give them up. It's such a hard decision. Like, if you think everyone that you know, that you grew up with, that you went to school with, that you worked with, that you played with, gone, and you have to sacrifice all of them if you want to be free.
And people started leaving. Your family started leaving.
Yeah.
Incredible scenes, like you wake up one morning, the top bunk is empty and Vic is gone. He doesn't even get to say goodbye. He's just gone. And Hopeful Christian, who, lest we forget, is your grandfather, which puts you in an extraordinary situation, because not only is he the top man, he is also the top man within your family. And he is saying you would have to forsake your family for the sake of your immortal soul.
Yeah.
And how old is he when he's saying, how old are you when he's saying that kind of stuff to you?
Well, you've
All your
taught
life.
it right all your life.
All your life.
All your life. That's how my Uncle Phil was treated when he left. So that set the way and the manner that everyone else gets treated when you leave. You get shut off, you're no longer family. If you don't choose God, then we don't choose you. That's it.
Do you worry about those people who are still there, your family who are still there, people you love and care about who are still there?
I want them to experience the life that I have. Like, I get to choose every morning what to do with my life. What I want to think, what I want to believe, who I want to date, who I want to marry or not marry, how I want to dress. Like, it's these tiny choices that make me feel so empowered, like this is actually my life now. So I would say my life is my own now, whereas before my life was Gloriavale's.
Lilia, when you left Gloriavale, what did you leave with?
One box of all my belongings. I remember going into our family room the day we left, and I saw everything that I owned there, and I knew I was leaving it all. You know, the lamp beside my parents' bed, and the bed covers that I'd made with my own hands, and the top bunk that I'd spent most of my teenage years on, like, in the bookshelf full of little children's books that I grew up reading, and I left all of it.
All the work you'd done.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of it really tough labour.
Yeah.
Were you paid for any of that?
No. The exchange, the agreement that you have with the church is that you work in exchange for the lifestyle. They'll provide your schooling, they'll provide your accommodation, your food, everything you need is there.
But when you go, that
When
means
you go, nothing.
no money.
No money. So how's that okay? Because, like, my family, there's 10 of us, 10 kids, my mum and dad. Mum was able to take $2,000, which I've written in the book, only because she had access to the account, so she managed to redirect some of our family tax credits to support us. But other than that, like, how would a family leave? How can they support themselves? We lived in a home from a church member on the outside, from a different church, who actually just put us up. And then we lived rent-free because people were helping us out. But we had nothing. We had to start from scratch.
Is Gloriavale claiming benefits on behalf of people inside and getting money from the state?
Well, they get family tax credits because they're low-income families, because they're set up as a charitable organisation. And yeah, I find it real, like, hypocritical that my granddad gets up and he makes the biggest point at every single concert or event they put on where they have outsiders come in, and he says, we don't claim the dole, we don't use government support. I know for a fact you're getting family tax credits. Like, don't lie about it, just maybe tell the truth.
You talk about who you want to marry and not marry. One of the most striking passages in the book for me is when Grace is told she has to marry, I think, Christian, a boy called Christian, right?
Yeah, right.
And she is absolutely terrified.
She's devastated, absolutely mortified, comes to me in tears. I drag her into the storeroom and I'm like, tell me what's happening. And she says, I have to marry this boy. I don't love him. We're not a good match. But if I don't, like, what's going to happen?
And the elders, the men, had chosen Christian as her husband.
Yeah, they say their marriages aren't arranged, but they so are. They say God picks them through the leaders.
And Christian didn't want to marry her. Neither of them wanted to marry. Right. And so what did Grace do?
So she left.
And when she left everything, right?
Everything.
You're starting from scratch at the age of?
She must have been in her 20s, early 20s.
With nothing in the bank?
Yeah. Nothing in the bank. She had family on the outside, but, you know, like, she was choosing to leave all of us, and that sense of stability, for her, that was a massive decision. She'd been caught trying to leave. She'd packed her bags, hidden them under a tree, and called an outside friend, and then they discovered her and she got taken in front of a men's meeting and told she was in rebellion, that she needed to repent. And gosh, like, just let her do what she wants. It's her life, right?
Is it appropriate that this place exists with those kinds of controls over people in our country in the 21st century? And please give me an answer that is your truth.
Okay, I'll give you an honest answer. I believe lots needs to change about Gloriavale, and the people are absolutely living in suppression. My passions today are to help free people, and the people living at Gloriavale are still trapped. Even if they don't know it, they're absolutely trapped. And like, this is the 21st century. Like, women have the right to vote. We can have careers and jobs, and the women in there, they can't do any of that. They have to cook and clean and have children, and that's their life.
Get up at 5:30 in the morning, as I recall it, and clean the loos,
yeah,
right?
sometimes 3 a.m.
And have their husbands chosen for them.
Yeah. So what type of life is that for someone who's creative and is inspired and wants to do something with their life? Like, you're literally trapped there.
Literally trapped there. That's how you feel about it.
Yeah, yeah. I felt so trapped. When my family were saying, Lil, come with us, we're leaving, I felt like, how can I leave? Because I'm so locked here. My heart is here. Not only my heart, but also all of my beliefs. And all of the things I've been taught since a baby have told me that if I leave, my life's going to fall apart.
Did it?
No, I think I found myself. Yeah.
Lilia Tarawa, whose book is called Daughter of Gloriavale, My Life in a Religious Cult, and it is just out. Max Toll has been touring the regions ahead of the election. We've been getting some of Max's work, some of it's been on Morning Report, and he's been talking to young people about the issues that matter most to them for the wireless series Beyond the Beehive. Well, at the weekend, he ended up halfway between Gisborne and Napier in a town called Wairoa. It's a small coastal town, about 8,000 people. Freezing works there, struggles. Times aren't always easy. Locals told him there aren't enough jobs or opportunities. So he asked them what they'd do if they were Prime Minister and had $1 million to spend in the town.
As you know, we get some mad flooding around here in Wairoa, and you got trees coming down. How long before we can't use the community centre?
How long? When's it going to stop? Stop the erosion.
Over the past couple of days, we've been in Kawerau, Gisborne. Now we've come to Wairoa, and the same themes keep coming through, that young people feel like politics and politicians can't positively affect their lives. They're incredibly eloquent when they talk about the issues that affect them and other young people in their area, but when it comes to politics, there's a complete disconnect. So basically, in Wairoa today, we're going to ask young people a very simple question. If you were Prime Minister and you had $1 million to spend in Wairoa, what would you spend it on?
I'd buy a McDonald's and a KFC so it can give our youth a couple more jobs out there, because I love to eat McDonald's and so does my son.
The children, brother. Children. Yeah. Invested in putting some new playgrounds around town. You know, maybe make a few of our blind spots a bit more safer. You know, I see them doing it everywhere else. Like in Flaxby and Hastings and stuff, they've got speed bumps when you're going down their little roads and stuff. And there's a lot of kids playing around and stuff, bro. So it's all about the old kids, the next generation.
I'll tell you one thing. Maybe we can reinforce these riverbanks.
Yep.
Because,
definitely.
you know, we get some mad flooding around here in Wairoa, and you got trees coming down. How long before we can't use the community centre?
How long? When's it going to stop? Stop the erosion.
$1 million, Wairoa. Yeah, I think serious answer would be you need better schooling, better something more for people to actually stay. Because everyone, as soon as they finish high school or even through high school, they just leave.
By chance, we met Zach Stark, an American rapper now living in Wairoa.
I run the theatre down the road, the Gaiety Theatre, just a manager. And then outside of that, my family's bought the Clyde Hotel on Marine Parade, and we're going to start a recording studio and post-production facility, which hopefully will turn into a school.
Why Wairoa?
It's about Wairoa, but also about the whole East Coast. Is like the sheer number of musos and like talented people here is kind of outrageous, and they're all super duper humble and hiding in the woods. And so we really want to kind of uncover that and help them, you know, reach maybe hopefully an international status.
I'll ask you the same question I've been asking everyone else today. You've got $1 million to spend in Wairoa, apart from the recording studio and everything you've got planned.
Yeah.
What else are you spending it on?
I think it's the same what the bros were saying earlier. It's just the riverbank, man. Like, it gets real rough when the heavy rains come, and forestry, and as you can see, like there's just logs upon logs in there. And when we first got here, it was emerald like every day. And then the past 2 years, we've only had a handful of good days. The rest of the time, it's murky. There's logs sticking out of it. I also used to wakeboard in Hong Kong, and we used to, you know, run the river. But now it's kind of dangerous. Like if you fall over and you hit a branch or something, you can't see under the water. Like you're done. So that's kind of upsetting. I would, if it was me, I'd be trying to do that.
A few minutes later, we met Craig.
There's not really that much for us to do around here. There's no jobs, no opportunities. Pretty much we just walk around just wondering what the f we can do with ourselves, bro. There's nothing for our kids, there's no shops, as you can see, our town's dead.
Yeah.
And there's somebody getting rich around this town, but it isn't us.
So you've got $1 million.
I don't got $1 million. Someone in this town's got $1 million.
If you did, to spend in Wairoa tomorrow, what would you spend it on?
First I'll spend it on myself and getting my house and my kids all happy, and then I don't know, I'll try and help out our community.
Yeah.
But you can paint this town up, it looks like sand.
Yeah.
People just come through this town, there's nothing, there's nowhere.
Do you feel like politicians and political parties care much for regions like this and areas like Wairoa?
Hell no. Hell no. They don't got Wairoa love.
More focused on their big cities.
On their big cities. But my bro, I lived in Perth for since I was 17. But as soon as I made my money, I came straight back here to live. Because I just love it here. And you know, if they got to spend some time in our community, I think they'd love it here too.
Max Toll in Wairoa, 6:26. News just in on Checkpoint. High-profile New Zealand First candidate Shane Jones has been ranked at number 9 on the party's list. Number 9. Mr Jones is hoping to make a political comeback, standing in the Whangarei seat for New Zealand First against National Shane Reti. Our producer Bridget Burke called the president of New Zealand First, Brent Catchpole, a few minutes ago.
Who decided to put Shane Jones at number 9?
Oh, that was a consensus of the list ranking committee.
And you convened that committee, do you?
Yes, I do, yes.
And so you decided to retain Ron Mark at the second position on the list?
Well, that was the only place he could be under the Constitution. The leader is number 1 and the deputy leader is number 2.
And so was there any discussion, Brent, at any point that Shane might like to go higher on the list?
No, there was... It was a consensus right throughout the whole process.
And so Shane had no problem with being at number 9?
None that he's said to me.
How many in total on the list?
Oh, in total? I believe it's 57, 58, round about that figure. I know one is pulled out for personal reasons, but otherwise it's complete.
That is Brent Catchpole speaking to Bridget Burke a few minutes ago. Checkpoint understands Tracy Martin will be number 3 on the list. Fletcher Tappertone number 4, Shane Jones number 9, which means what's the 120 seats in Parliament, so they're going to have to win about 7.5–8% of the party vote to get him in unless he wins Whangarei. Labour's polls say he's got a job of work to do in that electorate to pick it up from Shane Reti. It's about 28 minutes, well it's not about, there's a clock in the studio. It is 28 minutes past 6, I apologise for my uncertainty. Lots of emails tonight about Winston Peters. People taking two very different points of view on this, but people are saying that if it's a clerical error and that it's an honest mistake, that there is simply absolutely no issue here at all, full stop, and the money has been repaid. Other people are saying, hey, hold on a sec, we are superannuitants and every year we have to reconfirm whether we're single or in a relationship or whatever. Did Winston Peters do the same thing? Other people are saying that it's not beyond Wins just to simply cock it up. It is difficult, says Peter, to believe work and income cocked it up. There would have been an application form and a very clear declaration of his relationship status would have been required. Lots of you saying this. An unusual theory here from Ray, who says, hello, I work as a tax accountant. It appears to me that Winston has repaid excess superannuation income that he's presumably formally declared as taxable income. If so, he could now reopen probably at least 4 years back tax returns to have his taxable income now reduced by the amount of the super that he's now repaid for that year. Interest charge, this may be tax deductible, i.e. it is interest paid relative to income earned. Penalties not deductible. Interesting story. That is an interesting theory, Ray. And lots of people saying Wins do get it wrong. About half of you saying Wins do get it wrong, and this isn't a story. And about another half of you saying, well, hold on a sec. If he said he was single and he wasn't, what the? It is confusing, but we appreciate your feedback and we appreciate you being with us. That is Checkpoint for another evening. We will be back tomorrow at 5. Until then, a very good evening indeed.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Winston Peters says he received a superannuation overpayment because he was on a higher single person's rate while living with his partner. The tourism industry says it disapproves of Labour's proposed levy on international visitors because they already pay their fair share of tax. An urgent appeal has gone out to boat owners in Houston, Texas, to help rescue people caught in rising floodwaters. Mourners have gathered at Sir Colin Meade's old rugby club after more than 2,000 attended his funeral today. And Waikato University is planning to take up a government proposal to fund a new medical school for rural doctors, saying the communities have suffered decades of neglect. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Kia ora, I'm Melody Thomas with a podcast series called Bang, exploring sex and relationships over a lifetime. This week we explore some of the ways parents